And now, from the Room 111 studios, it's Hacking Engagement with James Sternovich.
Hey there, listener. Welcome back to the Hacking Engagement podcast. I'm so glad you're here. I'm going to describe a student. I'll bet you can picture one similar. This kid seems unenthused by many of the prompts and activities that are issued or done in class. Now, it isn't that they are incapable. In fact, just the opposite. When they apply themselves, they master directives quickly and effortlessly. Unfortunately, they complete these efforts without much enthusiasm. The student feels stuck in the endless wave of mundane requirements that overpopulate the typical K-12 experience. They are disillusioned with the one-size-fits-all approach to education. I'll bet you can think of a student like this. Picture that young person in your mind. I'll bet you worked hard to personalize their instruction and gave them room to grow and explore. Such efforts on your part are noble, and I applaud you for it. But the fact remains that we probably don't offer students enough intellectual freedom. We probably don't leverage curiosity enough. And this, dear listener, is where Collin Jewett makes a dramatic appearance. Collin was a classic bored student, but he doesn't come to my podcast to vent. Now he'll vent a little, but he's more interested in helping. Think of Collin as a customer who actually completes a customer feedback prompt and does so in the spirit of constructive criticism. We can learn a lot from students and former students like Collin if we have the courage and humility to listen. But Collin is not just an amicus curiae. He's also invested in helping improve the educational experience. Collin is an impressive young man. At the ripe age of 24, he's authored 2 books. He's a learning coach, a blogger, and a podcaster. He's created a Facebook group called Schools of Tomorrow, which will soon be a podcast as well. Collin gave me a heads up to 3 blog posts that may be of particular interest to listeners. Attentional dispositions and why you're probably not an auditory learner, curiosity, creativity, and memory, and how they're connected, and reawakening your creative genius. Everything I just mentioned will be linked on the show notes. All of it. Please migrate over and do some clicking. Now, Collin's interest in improving schools is not just dinner party talking points. He's acting on this passion. He provides a fascinating perspective in this episode that just may inspire you to try something novel. Buckle up, man. You're going to love this episode. Here's my elevator pitch for my brand new book, Teaching in Magenta. This book provides 100 ways to create a magnificent day in your classroom. Once you start stringing some magenta days together, you and your students will experience profound well-being and deep joy. That's Teaching in Magenta, which is now available on Amazon's virtual shelves. So here we are in the Room 111 studios on, I always tell you the weather. I don't know why I do that. Maybe I'm just a nerd, whatever. I'm in a room with lots of windows, so it's just such a natural thing to talk about the weather. And we have a summer thunderstorm running in to Galena, Ohio right now. Everything's getting dark. It's in the morning, but I have to turn on the lights to see stuff, and we need it. We've been missing a little rain. But here I am talking to myself and you folks when I have a guest here. His name's Collin Jewett. Say hello, Collin.
Hey, guys.
And Collin is a fascinating young man who has accomplished so much in his short lifespan, and we're going to get to all that. But first of all, he is from Indianapolis, Indiana, but he left the Midwest or the Northeast or whatever you want to call Indiana and moved out to Fort Collins, Colorado. Man, that's a solid move. That sounds beautiful.
It up.
And so Here in Ohio today, we're going to have temperatures around 80 with some thunderstorms. The weather's been nice, though, for the last week or so. What are you looking at in Fort Collins, CO today?
Well, this time of year, it can be anywhere from absolutely gorgeous and perfect to smoking hot.
Yeah,
So we're kind of in the smoking hot phase with occasional hailstorms,
yeah.
but generally it's pretty good. Can't
I'll
complain.
bet, man. I'll bet, man. You got a pretty view outside your house?
Yeah, we do. If you round the corner, you can see the foothills really well. We've got Horsetooth Mountain right down the street.
Are you going to do something physical today? You going to take a hike? You going to chop
Yeah,
wood?
my
What
wife and
are you
I
going to do, man?
My wife and I are joining a group of our friends and going camping later today.
Wow,
pretty
that sounds
common.
wonderful. That sounds wonderful. Now,
Yeah,
now, are you concerned at all about snakes climbing into your tent?
Climbing into our tent, no. I think our tent will be okay. We typically hammock though, and that's more you got a little bit more exposure to the elements, so
Yeah.
you never know. You never know what'll happen.
Well, I'm going to tell you something, sir. I have an objective to get back to Colorado. I've been there twice, and it's just been magical. So I'll look you up.
Please do. Yeah, we've got a guest room. I'm standing in it right now.
Perfect. Okay, so Collin, Jewett, Young, go-getter, lots of stuff going on there. Let's say you are put on the spot. Well, you are being put on the spot, and you have to describe yourself pretty quickly. How would you do it?
Avid learner
Yeah,
is probably going to be first one. I got to put that out there.
yeah.
And I'd say I definitely prioritize living life today.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big part.
Now look. I think something else you can add on there is humble, because this man at the age of 24 has what? How many books on Amazon?
We got two.
2 books. 2 books on Amazon. Most 24-year-olds cannot say that. He's a podcaster. What's your podcast?
The one right now is the Superhuman Playbook podcast. We've got another one coming out soon, though, but maybe I won't spoil that.
Okay. So we've got 2 books. We've got a podcast. What do you do for a profession?
Sure. I'm the director of coaching at Superhuman Academy.
Okay, director of coaching at age 24. So you had some success coaching, and how did you get that gig?
A lot of messaging during lunch breaks. So I was working as an engineer, and
Wow.
I was starting my coaching business while I was doing that. So yeah, I sent hundreds, maybe thousands of messages during my lunch breaks just to make connections and get those first calls. I was coaching people for free just to get some experience, get some exposure, and eventually paid off.
So here you are, this engineer, this highly trained professional, and you decided to leave that and go into coaching. We need some explanation.
Yeah, there was a lot to that. I mean, first of all, when I left high school, it was kind of odd. I had done really well in school up till that point. I had never had too much trouble. I didn't enjoy school. I thought it was boring, but
Oh, we're going to get into that.
we'll get into that for sure. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was thinking maybe I'd like to be a rock star. No, that was actually what I was thinking. I was
Sounds
like,
great.
Maybe I'll travel the world and be a guitarist.
Yeah.
And eventually my dad convinced me that was not the most practical profession.
The voice of reason.
Yeah, he told me, you can do music on the side and be an engineer, because he knew I was good at math and all that kind of thing. But you can't really be an engineer on the side and play music. Right. And I kind of disagree with that, but at least back then I was like, that makes sense. And so I only applied to Purdue, only applied to the engineering school, and that's where I got in, and that kind of started my journey as an engineer. But it was really kind of a spur of the moment decision.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's something, man. Now I'm going to tell you something. You are a perfect guest for this podcast, because I'm talking to educators right now, and your story right there, I saw in so many young people, these really talented students who were kind of sitting there just biding their time till they could get out of K-12 and pursue their dreams or whatever. But you're the perfect person to talk to because you are a recent customer. And you are like filling out a questionnaire here and talking about your frustrations with the product and how you can make it better. And what's great about it is you're just not complaining. You really want to help. You're just not like throwing crap, like just to throw it. You are trying to be constructive, and boy, do educators need to listen to people like you. Successful young people, fresh off the education treadmill, who can give us some great advice on how we can do stuff better. Wow.
Yeah.
That sounded impressive.
Hope to provide some good perspective today, for sure.
Okay, so let's get into this more about being a student. I mean, you made the comment you were bored. Well, that's not an unusual thing for a kid to say. I mean, I think even educators can go back and think about times when they were bored. But you think it's pretty profound. Talk about your experiences as a student, your frustrations, your boredom. Where did that come from?
Sure. Well, at least in K-12, I was ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. And so school wasn't challenging to me. I remember I very rarely took homework home. And I was at a private school, and it was relatively rigorous, I think, compared to a lot of K-12 schools. So it wasn't like it was just super easy. I mean, I took advanced classes because I felt like I was supposed to most of the time. Mm-hmm. But I never had too much of a challenge with it, except for honors physiology. That one was tough for me. But
and you probably welcomed that challenge.
I don't know. Honestly, I did well, but I wouldn't describe myself as like a good student. I didn't really care that much.
Understood, man.
But I will say that wasn't because I didn't love learning. At least I did at some point, because I was an avid reader from a really young age. My parents raised me to love reading. Yeah. I mean, I remember when we'd go on any sort of vacation, before we'd go to the library, and I would check out as many books as I could. And they were typically well above, the average reading level at that age. I remember first grade, I have this vivid memory of, I had this Star Wars book, and it was 300 pages long. And for a first grader, I mean, that thing felt like, I felt like I was bringing the Bible into class, and I would just proudly have that thing on my desk, and I'd be reading it. So I really loved reading. I loved learning. And over time, that just kind of died. And I really think that happened at school.
Excellent statement. So in other words, it just became so regimented, so stale, like this industrial approach where you were not like an average cog on the assembly line.
Yeah, and I wasn't learning what I wanted to learn. I wasn't learning when I wanted to learn, and I was doing what I was supposed to. Mm-hmm. Right. I was going from one period to the next because a bell rang. I was turning things because that's what was assigned to me, and I felt like I didn't really have a whole lot of choice or autonomy in that system. And I think over time, I just realized, well, I understand how to play this game. I know how to win this game. So I'll follow those rules, and I'll win the game. And once I'm out, I can go back to doing what I actually care about.
Stop the tape.
Honestly, at that point, I had no idea anymore. No,
stop. I want to say something. I want every listener right now to think about their students that they had last semester. I'll challenge you not to find at least one student just like Collin is describing. A kid, I love what you said, I learned how to play the game, I learned how to win the game. We have so many compliant students that are not challenged, they're just like, okay, I got to check this box so I can move on to more enriching life. And think about a kid that's 16, 17 years old and saying that. That's sad. That should be a time of incredible exploration, and here they are just in a holding pattern. Did you feel like you were in a holding pattern?
Yeah, and honestly, I had enough self-awareness at that time to feel like, man, these are special years,
Uh-huh.
and I feel like they're just being wasted.
Wow. That is self-aware, because I wasted some years at 16 and 17 and didn't really take stock of it. Okay, now, so your frustration with K-12, you didn't like the regimentation of it. You didn't like the lack of challenge of it. You didn't like the boring prompts that you could have mastered very easily. You just didn't find the whole thing stimulating at all. And then when you go to college, did you have a different experience?
Oh, yeah. Total, 180 in some sense.
Okay.
It was still a lot of stuff that I didn't particularly care about.
Yeah. You still have to take required classes.
Yeah, for sure. But I was suddenly on the other side of the coin. I had always felt like the fast kid. I was the smart one.
Mm-hmm.
I had the highest SAT score in our class. Like, I did, and it was a class of 100. It wasn't like a huge public school or anything. But,
right.
I'd always been on that side. And then I get to college and I struggled.
So you're at Purdue, right?
I was at Purdue. I was in the engineering program.
Sure.
And if anyone's been there, they know it's tough.
Yeah.
The concepts, the classes are hard. And I was doing everything I could. I mean, I managed my time pretty well for a college kid. I had a calendar and I actually followed it. And I know from experience as a coach, there aren't that many people who do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never really learned good, quote unquote, good study skills. The things that you're told you're supposed to do in school, which is take notes. I had never done that. I'd always just doodled.
Right.
So I started to pick up those study skills that I had always missed out on, and still didn't work. I was nearly failing out of school.
Did you enjoy the challenge of being challenged?
No.
It was defeating.
It was defeating, and it really changed my identity too. I had this recognizable shift at one point because I made excuses. Freshman year, I was like, well, things are just really new. This is a new format. I've never been on my own this much. I even pledged a house my first semester freshman year, and that can be crazy. And
yeah, that doesn't do anything for the GPA.
It was a dry house, so I will say that.
Okay, well, I didn't know there were those anymore. Okay. Yeah.
No, I was studying hard. I was really focused, but I made all those excuses, and so I kind of gave myself a pass freshman year. But my worst semester was third semester. First semester, sophomore year, when I was like, I've got it all together. I know how this works now, and it still clobbered me.
Wow. Were you angry at your K-12 preparation, angry at yourself, wondering why your classmates weren't having trouble, feeling like you weren't as smart as them? What were some of the emotions that you were going through?
Yeah, it was turmoil because it really was this huge change in identity. I had always thought, I'm the smart kid, whatever, I'll get through. I can just kind of breeze my way through school, and eventually I'll get to do what I want whenever I figure that out.
All right.
And all of a sudden, I was the slow kid, and there were people around me who didn't seem to be struggling nearly as much. And I just started to question, maybe my whole life is a lie.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not really that smart. Maybe I can't do this. And maybe I should just be, another, cog in the machine.
Do you think that all those K-12 experiences where you are checking boxes, being compliant, zoning out in class, were a huge detriment? They were missed opportunities.
I do. And a lot of the reason originally I was just, I was boring.
Yeah.
But the more that I've learned, and just for more context here, I'm not a life coach. I'm 24 years old. I don't pretend to have all the answers at all.
Yeah.
What I do is I help people learn. And so I'm on the other side of it now, where I see all of the baggage that people have from school.
Sure. Oh, that's beautiful.
I see the way that it has prevented them and stifled their abilities to learn. And most of the stuff that I do is just teaching people to unlearn all of that.
Okay.
And that's sad.
So this is a great segue here. So you're a successful person. You don't need to worry about the education system in the United States of America. I mean, you did your time. That's a good way to put it. So why do now, at 24 years old, you have this passion to try to improve the way we teach? Where's that coming from?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of my own, just from my experience that I've shared, just feeling like, wow, those were special years. And I feel like I kind of missed out on them because I was spending all my time trying to not be where I was. I'd be sitting in class and I would be daydreaming of being somewhere else.
Sure.
And you don't want to spend your life pretending that you're somewhere else.
I've done that as a teacher occasionally.
I can imagine, yeah.
Particularly when spring break is on the horizon.
Yeah, and so as I'm getting close, and also as a coach, seeing, okay, this wasn't just me. It's easy to think maybe it was just I wasn't cut out for school, and it was just me. But I've interacted with a lot of people at this point who have really suffered from education, and it's messed with the rest of their life.
Collin, I'm going to tell you something that's interesting about that is I was a massive slacker in high school, which is, quite frankly, one of the greatest attributes. That experience is one of my greatest attributes as a teacher because unlike my little National Honor Society colleagues, I get it when a kid is like, why do we have to do this, man? This is pointless. I understand that mindset more than some other educators who might have been great students and just can't understand why these kids aren't enthusiastic about diagramming a sentence. So I'm glad that you have come to grips with the fact that this is not an unusual disposition toward a K-12 experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't matter how quote unquote smart the person is either. I mean, I've worked with adults who were everything from, I struggled in elementary school to people who are now doctors or executives, pilots, people who have always done really well in school. And all across the spectrum, it seems like the way that we do school just wasn't good for them. It didn't help them have more passion or clarity about their life. It didn't help them to learn, that's for sure, because, I mean, when we're born, those first few years before we go to school, we learn a ton of the knowledge and the skills that we apply for the rest of our lives. And that's not in school.
Heck yeah, like learning how to walk. Good example, learning how to walk. Learning how to talk. I mean, those are miraculous learning achievements when you think about it. I mean, miraculous. And it's just through observation and trial and error.
Absolutely.
Or, I guess, listening. Babies are not lip readers. That was ridiculous. Now, I want to lay something on you here. Or I want to ask you a question. It's an interesting question. The audience might wonder, where are we going with this? I have a friend who's a former student of mine who's a teacher in Spain. Her name's Megan Zerger. And Megan and I, we just stay in touch. We just like each other. We just like keeping tabs on each other. And recently, a couple months ago, she goes, I have someone that I'd like you to talk to. His name's Collin Jewett. And I was like, sure, I like talking to people. And so Megan connected us because she thought that I might have some interesting perspectives that I could share with you to help you in your quest to improve education. Talk a little bit about like our initial interactions and how that and the byproducts of those interactions.
Yeah, and I really appreciated that connection. This has turned into an amazing rabbit trail of research for me understanding. So when we first talked, it was really just formulating the idea because I knew things could be so much better. And but I didn't have a whole lot of experience with other people's perspectives in education. You know,
Sure.
I had my own, and I had my other coaches who teach people how to learn too. But I really wanted to make sure, like, I wasn't some idealistic 24-year-old who was just gonna shove some newfangled ideas down people's throats that weren't
Yes.
actually effective.
Right.
And so I really wanted to talk to people who had been in the schools, who had been teachers and other students, and see if my perspective was shared, that maybe something should change. And so our conversation was the first of many that I've had now, which is great. And I heard echoed in what you told me, because you were a public school teacher for 34 years. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. And now you're an adjunct professor, right?
Right.
And I heard that sentiment, phrased a lot more articulately. Is that a word? From your experience, as a teacher, that, there are better ways to do things. And I think that's why you have this podcast and the book that you wrote too, because you've figured out some of those things. But I think there's a bigger conversation that needs to happen, because in the research I've done since then, I've realized this is not new. There are tons of people talking about this, from teachers to parents to business leaders who can't find good employees to college professors. There's people all over the spectrum who realize there needs to be a change and have different ideas. But the problem is they're not talking to each other. And I've seen this a lot. I'm in these different communities now. There's community for teachers to share with each other what's working in classrooms. So there's the teachers talking to each other. And I've seen forums of parents who are saying, here's what's wrong with our schools. And they're talking to each other and talking about how they can parent their kids to undo the harm that's caused in schools. And I've seen forums of students where they're sharing study techniques. You have all these different groups of people who recognize issues with education, and they're talking within their groups, but they're not talking to each other. And I think that's the connection that needs to happen for real change to occur.
That's an interesting observation. And you and I talked about this a little bit in our conversations. I agree with you. It's really weird, the variables that pop up when you start talking about reforming schools. Like, I laid one on you that I don't know that you'd considered, that you're like, oh, brother, that's ridiculous.
Right.
But here's a good example. I remember about 10 years ago at my school, we were all talking about going to a year-round calendar, which, some schools do and some schools still talk about. And one of the biggest problems with that is it would mess with, and I'm an old football coach, it would mess with 2-a-day football practice. It would like disrupt the athletic calendar. And that's not the point of going to K-12 school, is to be concerned about about whether the football team has 2-a-days or not. It's to try to prepare students for a fruitful future. But those are the kind of incredibly weird variables you can get into whenever you try to reform schools. So this thing that you're saying is essential. Different stakeholders with different agendas interacting and coming to a consensus. But man, it's not easy to do.
No, it's not.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's very possible, though, because across all those groups, there are a lot of different opinions about how we should reach the goal, but the goal that people are trying to reach tends to be very similar, maybe even the same. And that's, we want schools to prepare kids to live up to their potential, to live their lives to the fullest, to have lives that are meaningful, that are rich, to be confident, to be capable in their lives, to be independent. Those things I see pretty consistently.
Right.
And I think if we have the same goals, then we can work together, even if we disagree about exactly how to do it. I think there is always opportunity to work together in that case, and I think that's what needs to happen.
Do you think that this has to be more of a school system by school system, like community by community initiative? Because, boy, I'll tell you what, whenever you have like a national initiative, and educators have lived through a lot of them, they almost instantly become politicized and then forget about objectivity. It's gone. One of the things that I shared with Collin when we first started talking was back in the early 20th century in Gary, Indiana, a suburb of Chicago, which is now a depressed community. A disciple of John Dewey called William Wirt created a pretty amazing school system which really embraces a lot of concepts that we would consider today project-based learning or vocational education. In other words, it's teaching people hands-on skills, and it just was just like a breath of fresh air. And it immediately became politicized when they tried to spread it to New York City. These things are tough. Going back to my question, do you think that this is something that needs to be locally generated or on a much larger scale?
I have my hunches about that, but I definitely can't give a sure answer. I will say on the Gary Schools example, because I hadn't heard of that, which, I'm from Indiana. I hadn't heard of that until you shared it with me, and then I looked into it. And I think that's a really great example of what some of the problems are. And that whole schooling idea, it came from a person or a couple people.
Right.
And it was, the execution was kind of top down. It wasn't a whole conversation that involved the students, the parents, educators. There wasn't a large conversation that happened where they all decided together, you know what, let's try this. It was from the top down of, hey, I've got a great idea. It seems to be based on, more research than what we're currently doing. Let's try it.
Okay. I like that.
There wasn't buy-in before implementation.
I like that statement. I agree with it. I do think that the citizens of Gary, Indiana were by and large very supportive of what was taking place, but they weren't consulted. You're right. They weren't. It was something that was imposed upon them. These are tough questions, Collin, because, people have wanted to improve schools since schools have been around. It's just really hard to build that consensus. It's just tough. Okay, so let me shift gears a little bit here. You recently went to a school in Colorado called the Sudbury School. You visited there. You had a curiosity about it, asked them if you could come and observe, and they said yes. Talk about that.
Right. So the school that I went to, it's called Alpine Valley. It's in the, I think, northwest side of Denver, and it's not the first of its kind. It's actually based on a school out in Massachusetts. That's where the first one started. I think the first one started in 1968, so this is not a totally new thing at all.
Right.
But the ideas behind the school and the philosophy. Well, let me share this because this is somewhat provocative to start off with.
Oh, I love provocation.
Is that the way the school operates? Parents can drop their kids off, or if students can drive themselves, they can show up when they want. They can do essentially whatever they want all day at the school, and they can leave when they want or when their parent picks them up. They can also leave the campus during the day, assuming that they tell everybody or tell somebody where they're going and when they'll be back. I think above a certain age, they don't even have to do that. I'm not 100% sure about that. But it does start at a young age when you're able to leave the campus with somebody else, as long as you tell someone. So there's this massive amount of freedom, so much autonomy for the students. And they also have a democratic system. So every student has a vote. Every faculty member has one vote. Staff member has one vote. So it's completely equal in terms of the voting. And they vote on everything. I mean, I asked if I could record video and audio when I was there for the visit. Since school was not in session and they couldn't vote to give the person authority to tell me I could do that, he wasn't able to tell me I could do that. Sure. He was like, if you can come back when school's in session, we can vote on it. Sure. We've had people do that in the past, but I can't, because we can't vote on it. It's democratic. No one has more power than anyone else. And that includes voting on teachers' salaries. The 4-year-old in the school has a vote on that. Which, came as a shock to me. I didn't even know that when I went to visit. I did some background research, and I was pretty surprised. Like, wow, okay, that that seems like it could get out of hand.
Well, you'd be afraid that they say something like, give him a bike or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like, what's a 4-year-old?
Right. And so, there's a lot of potential objections that come up from hearing that kind of model. But,
yeah,
I mean, from what I can see and the research that's been done on graduates and everything, and the one in Massachusetts has a lot more students. It's a bigger sample size. It's been around a lot longer. So there have been some studies done on graduates and everything. Nobody from those schools leaves or graduates without knowing how to read, without knowing how to do basic math. These are some of the concerns people expressed when I shared about the school the first time. What if they don't learn how to read? You
Right.
have to do that. Well, none of the graduates ever graduate without learning the quote unquote basic skills that we think people need to learn in school. So that doesn't happen. And not only that, but graduates from these schools tend to know a lot more what they want to do with their life because they've spent their entire life having to make decisions for themselves.
Wow.
And so they have a lot of experience with that, and they're a lot more confident.
Okay, I want you right now to place yourself in that school at age 16. How do you think it would have gone?
I think I would have thrived in an environment like that.
Okay. Now, one thing I want to make sure that everyone knows is this is a private school, correct?
This one is, yes.
Are there any public schools that follow this model?
I think there might be some that get state funding. I'm not 100% sure on that, though.
Okay. But there's still probably some type of choice to go there.
Right.
Versus like a traditional school.
Right.
What did you see in the students? Or were the students there?
There was only one student there, and it was the son of the person who was leading me around. However, the person who was giving me a tour and answering my questions was a former student, and he had family members who were also former students, and he was now a teacher there.
What did he say about the experience? What did he say?
Well, he said that one of his prereqs for getting married was that they'd have to send their kids there.
Right.
So I thought that was telling.
It's kind of like being like Catholic or something.
Yeah. It was, he had gone to, I don't want to give too many details of this guy's life, but he shared some things with me. So he said that he had gone to a traditional school for a while. He had been a good student. And then he transferred to that school, and he shared some of his experience. Like at first, he was following the instructors around, like begging to be graded, essentially. He was so used to that kind of system, getting gold stars, getting his constant approval or disapproval. That's what gave him his identity as a student. And once that was all taken away, suddenly he felt like, well, now what do I do? And he said that's a transition a lot of kids go through when they come to this school. Is at first they feel kind of like lost puppy. Let's follow around the adults. But eventually they realize, oh, I can do what I want.
Wow.
And then they start to explore. They start to engage with the other students at the school. They start to pursue things that they're passionate about, which they figure out what they're passionate about pretty quick, because if you don't, you just sit there bored.
Right.
And so it forces you to actually think about what you want and how you can pursue that in community.
That's really interesting. Now, did you ask, what about slackers? I mean, what about the kid that just wants to sit on their butt and look at their phone? What, did they talk about that at all?
Yeah. So I collected questions from other people as well before I went into this. So I got questions from a clinical psychologist who wanted to know about, what about kids with, pathologies that are violent, which, by the way, he said students like that who can't be trusted to be safe around other students probably wouldn't be okay in that kind of environment. So that is a thing to think about. Like, this isn't for everyone at this point. And I'm not necessarily advocating for this type of school. I just think this experience is fascinating and worth thinking about. But yeah, one of the questions I asked, which I got from a homeschool parent, is, what do you do about unmotivated learners? What about people who just want to sit around and play video games all day? Because that's an option there. You can sit around and play Minecraft 8 hours a day every day if you wanted to. And I thought his answer was really telling. And he's like, I think there's a faulty premise there. And I think it's the idea that people don't naturally want to learn. And that's just not true. And it hasn't been shown to be true. People are extremely naturally curious about the world around them. They are interested and when they have autonomy, they choose to do things that they're excited about. And he said, there are a lot of students who play video games pretty frequently, but do they play more than public school kids? Doesn't seem to be the case. They just do it at a different time of day, maybe. But when they have the option to, kids will explore. And he said that he just hasn't found that to be an issue of kids just sitting around doing nothing. I mean, how many kids do you know that want to just sit around and do absolutely nothing?
Yeah. That's a solid response. And I can tell you, totally anecdotal, totally personal experience, but since I've been retired and have had more freedom, I've gotten into so much stuff. I mean, just incredible amounts of exploration that I didn't have time to do when I was working full time. So, I've experienced what you're saying. And I loved what you said when you're like, well, I'm not really advocating for a school like this because it's probably not realistic in a public school setting, but there are elements of what you observed which are desperately needed in a K-12 public school setting. And I think that freedom, that allowing students to pursue their passions is just not present enough. Are we simpatico on that?
Yes, absolutely.
So let's try to give teachers some advice. I mean, they have to work within a system, but the system ultimately needs to change and get better. But they still have to go in and teach their class next September, and they might not be given, the latitude to say, hey, show up when you want, do whatever the heck you want,
Sure.
man. What are some ideas that you have that you can lay on teachers right now that would have made all the difference in the world to a 16-year-old Collin Jewett?
I think it'd be really useful to challenge students to think about what they actually want.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it because personally, I didn't feel like that's something. And by the way, my high school teachers, I love my teachers.
Yeah.
One of our teachers married us. Like I really care about our teachers, and I know they really cared about us. And so I don't think teachers are the problem at all.
Uh-huh.
I think those are the people who care about kids that are going to make the differences. Right. But I think one thing that I didn't feel like the school really ever encouraged me to think about was, what do I really want to do? Not just long term. What do I want to do today? What do I want to do right now?
I think that's interesting because a lot of times we talk about long term, but not like, hey, what do you want to do today? That's interesting. And your sense is that after a period of walking around in circles, students will become pretty self-directed and willing to explore and motivated. You think it might be a little tough at first, but that'll come.
Yeah, and because I think when we think, all right, if we give kids freedom,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to squander it and they're going to do stupid stuff. I think a lot of that is because if you give them freedom after they haven't had freedom, they tend to do what they think they want to do, which is anything other than what they've already been doing.
Right.
But once they've had a little bit of time to adjust and they realize, oh, I'm actually free, I can actually think about what I want, they realize, sitting doing nothing isn't actually that much fun. That's not something that anybody really wants to do.
Right.
And things like video games that kids play addictively, I think a lot of that is escapism.
Sure.
If they didn't have so much to escape from, that might not be a big deal. And I've read research on this. I would encourage listeners to look this up on their own. But at least from what I've seen, if kids are given the option to play outside with friends versus video games, they tend to pick play outside with friends a lot more.
I hope so. I hope so, man. I'm telling you, I have grandkids and the tablet and all that stuff. You just look at them and think, oh my gosh, it's like cigarettes, I mean, just put the damn thing down, go outside. So I hope you're right on that. Hey, this is tough for teachers. It's a really good conversation for them to hear. They have to work within, whatever system they're working in. But one piece of advice I'm gonna end with, and this is like powerful advice because I'm gonna make myself look bad here, Collin. And you know, when you can like say something where you're dissing yourself, it's probably pretty darned authentic. So here's the thing: when I was a younger teacher, and they started talking about project-based learning and giving kids more freedom in the classroom, and I would try that sometimes, I would feel really guilty if students weren't being productive. You know, if I saw a kid in the back and they were kind of looking at their phone or just shooting the bull with their friend or whatever, I'd feel like, that's not good. I shouldn't, you know, what happens if the principal walks in and the superintendent walks in and just sees them just kind of shooting the bull with each other and not really doing anything? You need to morph as educators kind of out of that and give kids a little space to maybe not be like type A all the time and maybe just kind of feel their way. And it's tough for a lot of educators. Never underestimate that when you're talking about this with teachers.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the issues too, because even if a teacher out there decides, you know what, I want to give my students more freedom in class, mm-hmm. they have probably 7 other classes that day.
Sure.
Where they don't have that. And so, you know, this idea of giving them freedom and then they're going to spend it wisely or they're going to explore, that might not happen if they only have one class of that a day.
That's right.
They might just use that class period
just to zone out, baby.
Because they're escaping from the other 7 class periods. And so that's one of the big challenges. But I will say, if we have time here, as an accelerated learning coach, some of the things that I think teachers need to hear mm-hmm. is that students, even if they seem dull as a rock or sharp as a tack or whatever, all of them have incredible capacity to learn. And I've seen this from my coaching, is that if you teach people how to learn and you give them a little bit of experience of how their brain works and, you know, what cool things they can do with it, it becomes a lot more exciting, because I think one of the reasons kids do seem unmotivated to learn is because we're encouraging them to learn in a way that is painful.
Okay.
So part of that would be like rote memorization.
Sure.
Painful experience. Mm-hmm. It's not fun to repeat something over and over and over to yourself.
Which you're going to forget in a week anyway.
Right. The thing is, that's not necessary. And in fact, that's pretty counterproductive.
Yeah.
So I would really encourage teachers as well to look into some accelerated learning methods, visualization, like all those things. And I'm happy to share more on that if you want more resources.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Why don't you create a Google Doc of Collin's resources, and then we'll link that on the show notes.
Yeah, because I think those are skills that are really special and empowering for students to learn, mm-hmm. because you can have a student who thinks that they are dumb, and then all of a sudden they apply a couple techniques and they can learn something really fast that they never thought they could ever learn and put together.
Yeah.
And that's empowering. And the more you have good experiences learning something and feeling capable and competent, the more you're going to want that too.
I think the last statement you made is really good. I'm teaching a technology class this summer, and it's mostly to educators on summer break. And I have a couple students in there that are in their 50s. And they're really like, I don't know anything about technology. And they are struggling, but they're getting so much better. I give them like a creation to do every couple days. Like, do it, you know, here's the platform I want you to use, make whatever you want, you know, whatever. But what I see in them is as they interact with me on Zoom and we do a little screen share and I'll just show them just a couple things that are holding them back, then they become a lot more creative. Like, for instance, a woman was struggling with a hyperdoc, and I showed her how to manipulate the boxes so you could add a column or delete a column, which is just like this simplistic snap. But it was absolutely stalemating her. And once she learned how to do that, then she's like, oh my gosh, it was such a relief. And then she could really go to town. Hey, one other thing I want to lay on you, and I think that this is an important step for a lot of teachers, just take like young Collins in your class and just, you know, develop a relationship and ask like, hey, what would you like to do today? What would be something that would excite you? What would be something that would make you curious? Just keep asking those questions, and don't get discouraged if they say, well, I'd like to just kind of zone out in the back, put my head down and take a nap. They're going to say that at first, perhaps, but keep asking those questions. You might get some really good answers.
James, have you talked at all on this show about the focused and diffused states of thinking?
No.
Okay, I'm not going to talk too much about it because I know we're running up on time here, but if you're an educator, look those up.
Okay.
Because if you can get your students to operate in a diffused state of thinking a lot more, they're going to have a lot more fun and they're going to be a lot more effective at learning.
I think you need to either come on again and talk about it, or give me the name of somebody else that would be like great to have on here, because I'm curious. For sure.
Yeah, we should talk about it more. Essentially, it's the difference between a focus state is the one that you get in when you're under stress, and it's really effective for a few things. It's effective for executing strategies that have worked in the past. In other words,
it's good for survival too.
If a tiger's in the bush, that's not when you start thinking experimentally, like, what are all the different options I have here? Yeah. No, you immediately run back to where you know
I like
it's
the
safe.
Color combo on that tiger. That's not the time. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, so students are constantly under stress, and they're typically, and this is true of adults too, they're typically in a focused state of thinking, which does not invite experimentation and does not invite creativity at all.
I believe it.
And there's an actual brain state. There's actually certain types of activity in the brain that's going on in this state that really prevent that kind of thinking. Mm-hmm. But it is very possible to intentionally shift, and that's something that kids don't learn in school, and they're constantly pushed into the focus state. But if you can learn about these a little bit, a couple things you can do, for example, if you just play like a dumb comedy sketch right before your class starts and get people in a playful mindset, and you can maintain that, they're going to learn a lot faster and they're going to enjoy it a lot more.
I love that. Or you can just tell them about something you're doing at home, something funny that happened at home. I showed a picture one time, Collin, of my dog getting his toenails trimmed. As the first 5 minutes of class, and the kids laughed. They thought it was funny, and that turned out to be a good class. So I'm with you. I mean, you don't have to go find some skit on YouTube. You can just put up a picture about how you forgot to, how you fell asleep sunbathing and now you're sunburned or something like that. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah. Hey, and think of ways to keep it playful.
Hey, and the other thing I think you can do is go to the show notes and look at Collin's resources that he puts up there, and just think. You've got like a few months here to think about school again, and maybe take like a lesson plan and say, how can I give students more freedom? How can I encourage students to be more creative and explore more inside of this prompt? How can I adapt it? I think that's a great first step. Well, sir, you've been outstanding. I really hope you enjoy your camping this evening.
Will do.
Are you in a position where you're going to be camping where there's not much natural, where there's not much artificial light?
Oh, yeah.
So you're going to see some stars, aren't you?
Yeah, it's beautiful out there.
I was in Colorado one time, and I was pretty remote, but still I could see some town lights off in the distance and stuff, but a lot more stars than in Indiana and Ohio, that's for sure.
Yeah, thanks to the mountains. I think Colorado has some of the darkest spots in the U.S.
That's beautiful, man. That's beautiful. And then we're not talking negative there. We're talking positive. Talking about some dark places on the internet. There's some dark places in Colorado, but they're actually awesome.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
Okay, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you, James.
So here we are at the What You Can Do Tomorrow section, and the problem is that many students are uninspired. I mean, Collin talked a lot about his experiences, but there's a lot of students like Collin. The solution is to offer students more academic freedom. Now, what you can do tomorrow, analyze an upcoming unit and, pick a good one, and then go into that unit and insert a prompt or an activity which affords students intellectual and creative freedom. And then finally, reach out to a former or present student who seems like Collin, seems similar to Collin, seems kind of like, I don't know, not challenged, uninspired. And then ask that kid or, if they're an adult now, ask them how you could improve a student's experience in your classroom. Now, if it's a present student, you might get kind of a flippant answer. Expect that. Don't get thrown by it. It's okay. I mean, you can keep asking, or you can rephrase the question. Don't get discouraged by that. Just keep asking. I think if you keep asking, you might come up with some magnificent suggestions. When one is curious and independently seeks answers, it can become a magical experience. So good luck tomorrow engaging your kids.
Show notes for this episode can be found at jamesalansturdivant.com. If you enjoy Hacking Engagement, please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes.